Your eyes pop open in the middle of the night. You don't know what time, only that your room is pitch black, and that even your parents have gone to bed. Your gaze drifts to the closet, barely perceptible in the dark. You can make out the outline, maybe. Or maybe it's the chair with your favorite doll. Is the doll still sitting there? Or did something replace it? Or maybe it's the knowledge, the absolute certainty, that if you were to lean over the edge of your bed to look at the floor, that grasping arms with sharp claws would grab you and pull you under. You're alone, you're small, you're afraid. So you call out to your parents, crying, and after a moment, one stumbles into the room, clearly a bit groggy, but concerned for you. The light pops on, and you can see the room in perfect clarity. But maybe the creature just hid. You tell them your fears. There's a monster in the closet. There's a monster in the chair. There's a monster under the bed. And your parent checks those things for you, showing that there isn't anything else in the room with you, and reassures you that those monsters weren't real, that you're safe. In time, you come to accept that these monsters really don't exist. You get a little older, you learn more about the world, you understand things like your mind making up stuff in the absence of being able to see well in the dark. You know that monsters aren't real. Don't you? Human beings have evolved to look for threats in our environment. We survive by knowing what to avoid. Behaviors that indicate illness, predatory behavior, creatures with claws and jaws, what causes pain. We identify threats to ourselves and to our community, and we take actions to limit those threats. And some threats are obvious. Someone pulling a knife or a gun, that's a threat. Someone with a history of hurting people, that's a threat. Someone who repeatedly takes resources from other people, stealing from houses or even stealing from the stores that sells us the things that we need, they're a threat to our well-being too. And that's where things start getting a little abstract. We learn to recognize patterns and to apply those patterns to root out people who may not be an immediate threat, but may become one. And how do we determine those patterns? Well, we tell each other about things that have led to those threats. Someone who is poor might become desperate enough to steal, or someone who hurts animals as a child might be willing to hurt people as an adult. And sometimes people think they recognize a pattern and report it as one. Someone of a certain race or background is more likely to be a threat down the line. And it enters our collective consciousness, whether we believe it or not. And then we see someone of that race or background, and we're alone in a parking lot at night, and that warning that someone like that might hurt you floats back to the surface. And suddenly you're small and scared again, because you can't tell if what you're looking at is a monster. And now your parents aren't around to check for you. As an adult, you find yourself letting the dark around your senses fill in the gaps of what you can't see. The person in front of you has become the monster under your bed. But can we turn on the lights again and see with absolute clarity? Can we do the job our parents did for us when we were children and take the time to disprove the existence of a monster? I believe that we can. And to do that, we need to understand what characteristics we have assigned as being monstrous. Today, on Symbolism and Lore, I want to talk about monsters. What even are monsters? I mean, okay, yeah, the introduction identifies them as things we consider to be threats to our well-being, safety, and lives. And that's the baseline understanding of why human beings have conjured the concept of monsters since the dawn of humanity. Before we had advanced weaponry, large and sharp-toothed and thick-clawed creatures were abundant, and we had little defense from them. We hid in caves, up trees, we crossed to where our would-be predator couldn't follow. But that imprint has stayed with us, and all of those things are shorthand symbols of a potential monster. To create a monster template, given natural weapons that a human does not have. Fangs, claws, height, girth, animalistic attributes. Things that, without a constructed tool as a weapon, we would not be able to counter very easily if we were attacked. And this is where you get creatures like werewolves, or the minotaur, or dragons. Things that growl, that roar, that we know instinctively on sight are threats. I mean, look at the very concept of slaying a dragon. A beast so large, so powerful, so overwhelming, that a knight brave enough to take up the sword against such a creature was the embodiment of bravery and valor, a testament to human resilience and strategy, because dragons are otherwise unstoppable. Slaying the dragon literally means overcoming impossible odds to end a threat, especially to rescue the helpless and vulnerable. Obviously, we have monsters that don't fit into that template. As we grew more evolved as a species, as new kinds of threats emerged, we created new kinds of more human-like monsters, or creatures that slipped into uncanny valley territory. This is where you get undead creatures like zombies or vampires, or demons and spirits, or maybe witches, or the Fae, or aliens, where the fears are less about the impending threat and more about what we fear most about humanity. And at some point I will likely be covering each of these types in great depth as to what they each represent, but the commonality is beginning to recognize the threat in the near-human, or what we consider to be human-adjacent, instead of just fangs and claws and size. Werewolves also share this in common, the beast hiding within the human. Again, a subject for another day. Different cultures have different monsters that represent a cultural fear being given form. Even something as regarded as silly nowadays, Godzilla, represents a societal fear of human interference with the natural world, creating disasters too large to manage. So defining a monster in a universal way is hard, even as we sort of instinctively know what a monster is. A threat made of the other. Human beings may have evolved quite a bit from where we started, but at our cores, we still use fear as part of how we establish our boundaries and try to navigate a complex world with sometimes indefinable threats. As such, while we don't really believe in the vampire or the fairy or the demon, well, okay, the jury's still out on those for many people, but again, that's another discussion to be had. We still try to name the things we're afraid of. Invasion to our homes or communities, threats to our physical safety, illness or famine, insecurity of resources such as food or shelter, or, in the modern age, currency itself. We can't explain those things using what are commonly defined as fictional superstitious creatures, but what if we assign those traits to another group of people? Most forms of bigotry have their roots in fears of the other. We have drifted into a place where that's an assumed default in our media and culture, and everything that isn't in that narrow category of what is presumed a default state then becomes the other. In a world where male is used as the model for the everyman, women, non-binary, and other genders are treated as strange, a deviation, and are often seen as mysterious, unknowable, emotional, or unrelatable. When able-bodied is viewed as the default, people with disabilities are written off and often flat-out ignored. Their agency is no longer considered to be their own, simply because their limitations are different from someone who is able-bodied. When we assume that white is a default, then people of color are treated as tokens, only there to provide diversity or a plot-dictated trope. Often, even if a character who doesn't fit this default is given a deeper plot, they're more likely to face some sort of tragedy or some romanticization of the struggles that they deal with. A lot of writers are eager to create disabled characters who use their disability to become a superpower of some kind, a la Rain Man or Daredevil. Or perhaps a story featuring a trans character will be quick to showcase transphobic attitudes, often even on the basis of trying to highlight the struggle and humanize it, give face to it, but still not showing trans people in any light other than tragic and painful, implying that to be trans is to suffer inherently. For the longest time, broadcast standards insisted that any gay characters in a plot could not win, and would often find themselves killed off. Hence the origin of the bury your gays trope, and why a lot of villains are queer-coded. Even though this isn't an industry standard anymore, our media seems stuck in these traditions. People of color face their own othering experience through media. They are more likely to find themselves cast as antagonists, as thugs or terrorists or sex workers, or the sassy best friend to their white counterparts. And unfortunately, because this is so ingrained in our cultural experience, most of the jobs available are for roles like these. And a person of color looking for work will either have to take them, or have internalized the messages about what they are to the point of embracing that role, maybe even specializing in it. Now, that is a generality. There are always exceptions. There are people who genuinely own it and reinvent it, and there are a lot of creative ways that people are co-opting and subverting these tropes as we move into a modern sensibility with storytelling. You can undoubtedly find many examples that contradict the general statements that I've made, but I assure you, I'm aware of them. The problem is that historically, there is a problem with othering people, and it has led to dehumanizing many marginalized groups, making them easier to write off the less we see them portrayed as dynamic, versatile characters with plot progression or lives defined outside of tragedy. When we other a group of people, we boil them down to a set of characteristics, a set of predetermined templates instead of human beings with lives, thoughts, feelings, dreams, and experiences. And while no, one time seeing a group of men surround a white protagonist with guns and threatening body language isn't in itself going to make someone racist, over time, if that is all that someone ever sees of a black man, it writes itself into our brains as being the way of things. Even if we intellectually know that this is a racist portrayal, the continued exposure has the effect of sort of gaslighting us, or further watering the seeds of racism that have already been planted. You know what those people are like, someone says. And we do. We've seen them time and again. Loud, obnoxious, rowdy, mean, bullies, stupid, etc. Those people are not one of our people. Or so the surprisingly persistent clan mentality tells us. Well, what did I expect from you people, says the manager of a hotel as soon as a person of color starts complaining about the service they've gotten. You always try to scam a better room or getting things for free. And that's not true, but because it's all we've seen of a certain demographic, it's what we come to expect. Those people are not our people. They behave in unscrupulous ways. They are tough and emotionless, and only exist to perpetuate crimes. When someone who has been classified as an other to how we self-identify starts to fit the bill for one part of the template, we are inclined to apply the full template to what we think they fall into, and write our own narratives from there, to protect ourselves from being taken advantage of or tricked. Because we hold the characteristics we have attributed to a certain demographic in contempt, and thus, if that demographic is assigned those characteristics, we start to hold the people in that demographic in the same contempt. Eroding our sense of someone's humanity over years, decades, generations, has a profound impact on the way we view someone we've been conditioned to see as the other. Because as soon as there is a boundary between us and the other, that old fear curls up from the back of our minds. This other, who we don't see as sharing our values or community, they might be a threat. And if you've been shown this other as nothing but a threat, continually, even if you know that it's fiction, the fear still rises. A monster born from conditioning and misunderstanding appears in the faces of the ones we consider to be other. We see the mythological tricksters, tempters, superhuman threats that the media has painted over them, and we are afraid. We see the monster as though in perfect clarity, so how can it possibly be an illusion? A trick of the shadows in the night? It's as plain as day, as far as we can tell. There's still a big part of us that still calls out in the dark for a protector when we're scared. We want the knight riding in on the horse to slay our dragons, the vampire hunter with a stake and crossbow all engraved with religious symbols, the soldier who stands against gunfire and bombs, or just our parents to soothe and reassure us. We need to feel safe, and we often relegate those protective duties to others whom we trust with the weapons we arm them with. But the monsters we see in the world around us today are not supernatural. They're not even truly monsters, but we're trained to see them that way. And that includes those who we have invested in protecting us. Sometimes, unfortunately, there are those who get into the role of protector because they seek to be monster hunters, because they've been so successfully conditioned to see the others as monsters. They've been so incensed at what they've been taught to believe and any example that fits in with their preconceptions, they want to take up arms and rid the world of these monsters. And oftentimes, we see real monsters emerge in these positions of authority. Human nature is complicated, and whatever mistakes we make them because we genuinely believe in the logic that went into those mistakes. We're flawed. Sometimes we hurt people. Sometimes, in our own hurt, we seek justice and are not able to see those around us who are also hurting. And so, seeing ourselves as the heroes in our own stories, we take action to rectify what we think is the cause of hurt, often finding it easy to blame the others for our losses. I'm going to be clear here. The prejudice of the marginalized is not on the same level as systemic injustice and discrimination. Individually, you can have bad experiences where you've been judged without being known, and it can be frustrating to be maligned because of the actions of others who share your demographic, only to be told, "You're privileged though, so it's okay." No one enjoys being hurt and then immediately blamed for it. As someone who has been accused of racism in instances where I did not see my behavior as racist, I understand that initial sting of frustration, the indignity of being accused of something you didn't do. I get it. But what I take away from those experiences is that I only have to live with that once every 7 years or so. For marginalized people around the world, those moments of being judged for something you did not do, or for something you had no choice but to do because of systems in place that undermine your resources and agency constantly, are daily, hourly for some. The term microaggression was coined to apply to those small ways that those summary templates made for us can erode at our sense of well-being, doubt ourselves, feel gaslit. For example, I am a rather rotund lady, and I find that I cannot enjoy any media without being confronted with a negative stereotype about my body type. At best, I am the pathetic, ugly creature in need of a healthy diet and a makeover. At worst, I am the body horror of ultimate revulsion, an evil that must be excised from the world, an eyesore to be mocked. And it can be something small. "Are you sure you want to eat that?" while getting a slice of cake at a social gathering. "Maybe you should just get a water instead," someone offers while I consider a light snack. "Have you tried replacing one meal a day with a smoothie made from chalk and despair?" I have suggested to me in one form or another. Some sort of suggestion, well-intentioned but misplaced. Or, "You've got such a pretty face," to mask contempt for my body. "Wow, that's so brave of you," someone says encouragingly when I step outside in a bathing suit, implying that exposing this monstrous thing about myself to the outside world takes such bravery. So I know, in my own way, having been turned into a monster by society. I am a joke, or a symbol of overconsumption, or an analog for the bully that takes too much, or even someone so eternally hungry that I could turn to cannibalism at a minor inconvenience. So when I say that we need to reevaluate how we code people with monstrous attributes, it comes from a place of personal experience. And even then, I am still privileged in other ways. I may find obstacles in medical care, for example, but then so are many other othered groups of people in our society. And when I call the ones who are armed to protect us, even if they don't see me as fully human, I am not likely to be calling my own monster hunters to my doorstep. I am not likely to find myself staked through the heart. But others are not as fortunate. Others must gamble that when they are in danger or in an emergency situation, they won't find themselves facing a monster who wants to and has the means to hurt them. They must gamble that walking home from the store, or playing in the park, or sitting in a car in a parking lot won't put them face to face with those who decide to execute them on flimsy pretenses. And that if they are hurt, or worse yet, lose their lives, they and their families must hope that the world will remember their humanity in between having every potential aspect of their lives trotted out for the court of public opinion to decide whether or not they were a monster that has been justly executed. And when faced with a monster wearing the skin of a monster hunter, when pinned with fear, when their lives are being snuffed out while the world watches and laughs, when the delirium of asphyxiation sets in, they, too, often retreat to a place of darkness where they cry out for their mama to come save them. But turning on the light won't banish these monsters when they appear in broad daylight. I imagine I've made it clear by now what inspired me to tackle this particular subject today. Current events being what they are, we need to be mindful now more than ever the kinds of messages we are consuming from our media. The symbols of monsters and inhuman beasts we see are often reflections of associated traits in human beings. I have planned episodes on how vampires compare with the wealthy and how zombies compare with rampant blind consumerism. There are social cues consciously or unconsciously manifesting in the stories that we tell, and the more we feed into them unquestioningly, the more we run the risk of creating monsters in our daily lives. I expect several of you will argue with the statements I have made in this video. I anticipate rebuttals of how I'm portraying privileged groups as monsters, or how I'm not going in depth on the statistics enough, or how I'm just straight up wrong or misrepresenting information. But what I call monsters are not those who simply make a mistake, or slip up, or even simply those who feel justified in using force. I'm referring to the ones who gleefully grin in anticipation of being able to turn their guns on people. I'm referring to the ones who see a child with a toy gun and shoot before the vehicle they are in has stopped. I'm referring to the ones who kneel on a man's neck for 9 minutes while he begs for his life and smile while they do it. Those are monsters in my mind. And I feel that the way we dispel the monsters the way our childhood fears were chased out is by continuing to shed light on them, exposing them for what they are. Educate yourself. Listen to the voices of those crying out in anguish and terror. Maybe even figure out how to be the parent who steps in to turn on the lights and reassure those trapped in their fears, to help distinguish between shadows and imagination and real, tangible threats. Consider the media you consume carefully, and look for the messages we are internalizing. That is what I hope to do with this series in the long run, one symbol or lore analysis at a time, to make you think, to decipher and interpret things beyond a surface level. Help me to turn on the light.